Glass exploded in the dead of night, a brick crashing through my window with a note that stopped my heart. Stop, or he's ours. Who would threaten a mother's child, and what secret from my scar-covered past pushed them this far? One thing's clear, the truth I'm about to unleash will either save us or destroy everything. Subscribe now and help us hit 1,000 subscribers. Be part of this fight for freedom. The clang of a spoon hitting the floor jolted me awake from a daze. My hands raw from scrubbing pots, my back screaming after 8 hours hunched over a desk, and Ethan's voice slicing through the air like a jagged knife. "Where's my damn coffee, Lydia?" I froze, the soapy water sloshing over the edge of the sink, my fingers trembling from exhaustion. The kitchen was a mess, greasy pans piled high, a half-eaten sandwich Jack had left on the counter, and the faint hum of the TV where Dorothy sat, barking her own orders. "Lydia, dear, my tea's gone cold. Fix it." Her voice dripped with that fake sweetness she used to mask her venom, but I knew better. I always did. I wiped my hands on a stained dish towel, glancing at the clock. 8:47 p.m. I'd barely been home an hour, my coat still draped over a chair, my shoes kicked off by the door. Work had been brutal, a stack of reports due by morning, a boss who didn't care that I'd barely slept in days. And yet, here I was, back in this prison disguised as a home, where rest was a luxury I couldn't afford. "I'm coming," I muttered, my voice barely audible over the clatter of dishes. Ethan scoffed from the couch, his boots propped up on the coffee table I'd scrubbed clean yesterday. "Yeah, you'd better." Can't even handle a simple request. 5 years ago, I'd stood in a white dress, smiling at him under a canopy of fairy lights, believing in promises whispered over glasses of cheap champagne. Partnership, love, a family. I was 23 then, naive and full of hope, imagining lazy Sundays and laughter echoing through a house we'd build together. Now, at 28, that dream was a ghost haunting me. The man I'd married had morphed into a stranger, one who lived off my paycheck while treating me like dirt. And Dorothy? She wasn't the grieving widow needing care after her husband's death like they'd sold it to me when we moved in. She was a queen in her own mind, and I was her servant. The kettle whistled, snapping me back to reality. I poured Ethan's coffee, black and bitter like his words, and set it on the table beside him. He didn't look up from his phone, just grunted, like that was thanks enough. Dorothy waved her empty mug at me, her painted nails glinting under the lamplight. "Hurry up, girl. I don't have all night." I bit my tongue, swallowing the urge to snap back. What was the point? They'd twist it, make me the villain, like always. Then I heard it, a soft shuffle behind me. Jack, my little man, padded into the kitchen in his dinosaur pajamas, his dark curls a mess from wrestling with his pillow. He held a chipped plastic cup of water, his small hands trembling as he offered it to me. "Mommy, you look tired," he whispered, his big brown eyes wide with worry. My heart cracked open. I knelt down, taking the cup, forcing a smile, even as tears pricked my eyes. "Thanks, buddy. You're my hero." He grinned, that gap-toothed smile that kept me going, and shuffled back to bed. I stood there clutching the cup, the warmth of his kindness a stark contrast to the coldness around me. Ethan didn't notice. Dorothy didn't care. To them, I was invisible unless they needed something. Coffee, tea, a clean floor, a punching bag for their frustrations. I turned back to the sink, the water now lukewarm, and caught my reflection in the window. Hollow eyes, sagging shoulders, a woman I barely recognized. My sleeve slipped as I reached for a plate, revealing the scar, a jagged line across my wrist, faded but still there, a silent scream from a night I'd tried to forget. It happened 2 years ago, after a fight over money. Ethan had been drinking, his temper flaring when I asked why he hadn't looked for a job. "You think you're better than me?" he'd roared, shoving me hard against the counter. The glass I'd been holding shattered, slicing my skin as I fell. He'd apologized the next day, flowers in hand, swearing it'd never happen again. I'd stayed for Jack, for the hope that he'd change. Should I have left then? The question gnawed at me, a wound deeper than the scar itself. Lydia! Ethan's shout yanked me back. What's taking so long? You deaf or just stupid? Dorothy chuckled from her throne in the living room. She's always been slow, useless girl. The words sank into me, heavy and familiar, like chains I'd worn so long I'd forgotten they were there. I was Lydia Harper, mother, breadwinner, survivor, and yet in this house I was nothing. But as I stared at that scar, something flickered inside me, a spark, a whisper. Maybe I didn't have to stay nothing forever. The air in the kitchen felt thicker the next evening, like it was pressing down on me, waiting for something to break. I'd barely slept. Jack's quiet, "You look tired," echoing in my head, the scar on my wrist itching like a warning. I was stirring a pot of spaghetti, the steam curling up to sting my eyes, when Ethan stormed in, his boots thudding against the linoleum. "This all you got for dinner?" he snapped, peering into the pot like it was an insult. "What am I, a kid? Where's the steak?" I kept my voice steady, though my hands shook on the wooden spoon. "We can't afford steak, Ethan. I'm doing my best." "Your best?" He laughed, a harsh barking sound that made my stomach twist. "Your best is pathetic. Look at this slop." He grabbed a plate from the counter and dumped half the pot onto it, sauce splattering like blood. Dorothy sauntered in behind him, her perfume sharp and cloying, a smirk tugging at her lips. "She's never been much of a cook, has she? Lazy wife." "I'd have made a proper meal if I weren't stuck with her." I bit my lips so hard I tasted copper, the scar pulsing under my sleeve. 5 years of this, 5 years of swallowing their poison, and still, it cut deeper every time. I set the table in silence, the clink of forks against chipped plates the only sound. Jack sat across from me, poking at his food, his small face scrunched in thought. Ethan shoveled spaghetti into his mouth, barely chewing, while Dorothy picked at hers like it was beneath her. "Tastes like cardboard," she muttered, loud enough for me to hear. No wonder Jack's so skinny. That was the match to the fuse. I dropped my fork, the metal clattering against the plate, and looked up. "I work all day, Dorothy. I cook, I clean, I pay the bills. If it's not good enough, maybe you should try it sometime." The room went still. Ethan's jaw tightened, his fork hovering midair. Dorothy's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. "Oh, listen to her," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "The little maid's got a mouth now. You think you're something special, don't you?" Before I could answer, Ethan slammed his hand on the table, making Jack flinch. "Enough, Lydia. You don't talk to my mom like that. You're nothing without us." His words landed like a punch, echoing the doubts I'd wrestled with last night. Nothing. Was that true? I opened my mouth, the spark from yesterday flaring hotter, but Ethan cut me off, leaning forward, his eyes dark and cold. "Leave if you want, Lydia, but Jack stays with me." My breath caught, a sharp, jagged thing in my throat. "What?" I whispered, barely audible. He smirked, leaning back in his chair. "You heard me. My son doesn't need a weak mother like you. I'll take him, and you can crawl back to whatever hole you came from." Dorothy chimed in, her voice smooth as ice. "I've already called my lawyer friend, dear. Late nights at work. That accident with your wrist will prove you're unfit, a danger to him." The world tilted. My hands gripped the table, nails digging into the wood as their words sank in. They weren't just stripping me of dignity. They were threatening to rip Jack away. My boy, my reason for breathing. I saw his face in my mind, those big eyes trusting me, that shaky little smile. And something inside me roared. "You can't do that," I said, my voice trembling but rising. "He's mine. I've raised him, fed him, loved him while you two sat there, judging me." Ethan laughed again, colder this time. "Try me, Lydia. You'll lose." Jack's chair scraped as he slid down, running to his room. I followed, my heart pounding, and found him under his blanket, clutching a crumpled drawing. A stick figure family, just him and me, smiling under a bright sun. No Ethan, No, Dorothy. Why don't they like you, Mommy? He whispered, his voice so small it broke me. I pulled him close, tears spilling down my cheeks. I don't know, baby, I lied because the truth was too heavy for his 5-year-old heart. I had no answer, only an ache that wouldn't let go. Back in the kitchen, Ethan and Dorothy were gone, their plates abandoned like a battlefield. I sank into a chair, the silence suffocating, and that's when it hit me. I couldn't keep doing this. Not for me, not for Jack. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and typed divorce papers into the search bar. The screen glowed in the dark, each word a lifeline. Petition for divorce. My thumb hovered over download, fear clawing at me. What if they were right? What if the court believed their lies, the scar, the late nights all twisted against me? But then I thought of Jack's drawing, his trust, and pressed it anyway. I'm done being your punching bag, I whispered to the empty room, the words tasting like freedom and terror all at once. Glass shattered at 2 a.m., a sharp, violent sound that yanked me out of a restless sleep. My heart slammed against my ribs as I bolted upright, the room pitch black except for the faint glow of the streetlight seeping through the blinds. For a moment I thought I'd dreamed it, until I heard the crunch of gravel outside, footsteps fading into the night. I threw off the blanket, my bare feet hitting the cold floor, and crept to the window, peering through a crack. My car sat in the driveway, its driver's side window, a spider web of broken glass glinting under the moon. A brick lay on the pavement beside it, a folded note taped to its jagged edge. I didn't dare turn on the lights. Ethan and Dorothy were asleep down the hall, or so I hoped. My hands shook as I slipped on a hoodie, grabbed my phone, and tiptoed outside, the night air biting at my skin. The note was scrawled in black marker, the letters uneven but unmistakable. Stop, or Jack's ours. A chill ran down my spine, colder than the wind whipping through the trees. This wasn't just a threat anymore. It was war. I sank to my knees beside the car, the rough concrete cutting into me, and clutched the note like it was a live grenade. They'd do anything to keep me trapped, to keep Jack as their pawn. The scar on my wrist throbbed, a cruel reminder of how far Ethan could go. Back inside, I locked the door and dialed Sarah Brooks, the divorce lawyer I'd found online after downloading those papers 2 nights ago. Her voice was groggy but steady when she answered. Lydia? What's wrong? I whispered the story. The brick, the note, my voice cracking as I read it aloud. This is intimidation, she said, her tone hardening like steel. They're desperate now. We'll use it against them, but you need to be careful. Get Jack out of that house. Tonight, my stomach lurched. Leave him somewhere safe? The thought of being apart from him tore at me, but she was right. If they'd gone this far, what was next? I packed a bag for Jack, his dinosaur pajamas, a toothbrush, that crumpled drawing he'd shown me, and drove him to my sister's place an hour away, the broken window letting in a howling draft. He stirred as I carried him to the car, his voice sleepy and small. Mommy, where are we going? I kissed his forehead, forcing a smile. Mommy's fighting for us, buddy. You're gonna have a sleepover with Aunt Meg, okay? He nodded, his trust breaking my heart all over again, and fell back asleep against my shoulder. At Meg's, I hugged him tight, whispering, I'll be back soon. Before driving home alone, tears blurring the road. The next day, I met Sarah at her office, a cramped room stacked with files and coffee mugs. I handed her the note, the receipts I'd saved, mortgage payments, grocery bills, Jack's preschool fees, all proof I'd kept this family afloat. She flipped through them, nodding. Good. This shows you're the provider. Now get me more recordings, anything. Build a fortress of evidence. I'd already started, my phone now a weapon. Yesterday I'd caught Ethan snarling, You're worthless, Lydia, and Dorothy muttering, No one else would put up with her. Click, click. Every word a nail in their coffin. But then I found something else. In the trash, under a pile of takeout containers, was a pill bottle. Ethan's name on the label, prescribed for anxiety, dated 6 months back. My breath hitched. He'd never told me. Was he hiding it, ashamed, or just too proud to admit he was crumbling too? I turned it over in my hands, the orange plastic cool against my skin. Use it against him, show the court he's unstable, or let it go, keep my hands clean. The question gnawed at me, a moral tug of war I couldn't shake. That night, Dorothy changed tactics. She shuffled into the kitchen as I scrubbed the counter, her voice soft, artificial. "Lydia, dear, why don't we put this divorce nonsense behind us? We're family, aren't we?" I didn't look up, my rag moving in tight, angry circles. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me," I said, my voice flat. Her mask slipped, just for a second, her eyes flashing before she forced a tight smile. "You're upset. Understandable. But don't throw everything away." I let her words hang there, untouched, knowing they were hollow. Later, I hid in the hallway, ear pressed to the living room door. Their voices were low, conspiratorial. "She'll break soon," Dorothy hissed. "Or we'll make her," Ethan replied, his tone dark. That brick was just the start. My blood ran cold again, but this time it fueled me. They thought I was weak, a pawn they could scare into submission. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I slipped back to my room, the pill bottle still in my pocket, the note and recordings locked in a drawer. I wasn't just fighting for Jack anymore, I was fighting for me. And I'd win, no matter what it took. "She's unstable," Ethan's lawyer roared, his voice bouncing off the courtroom walls as he jabbed a finger toward me. "Late nights, a history of accidents. She's unfit to raise a child." I stood frozen at the defendant's table, my hands clenched into fists, the weight of the past week crashing down on me. The judge, a stern woman with gray streaks in her hair, peered over her glasses, her expression unreadable. Ethan sat across the room, his suit crisp, his face schooled into a mask of quiet suffering. Dorothy dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief beside him, playing the grieving grandmother to perfection. My stomach dropped. Had they twisted my life into a weapon against me? The hearing had started an hour ago, and I'd barely breathed since. Sarah Brooks, my lawyer, squeezed my arm under the table, her voice a whisper. "Stay calm, Lydia. We've got this." But Ethan's lawyer was relentless. "We have a witness," he said, smirking as he called up a woman I vaguely recognized, Kelly, a coworker I'd shared a cubicle with for years. She wouldn't meet my eyes as she took the stand. "Lydia's erratic," she mumbled, her voice shaky. "Always stressed, snapping at people. I worried about her kid." My jaw dropped. Kelly, who'd borrowed my lunch money last month, who'd complained with me about deadlines over coffee, bribed. They'd bought her silence, her lies. "Your Honor," Ethan's lawyer continued, "my client's been the steady hand in this family. He deserves custody and support to keep the boy safe." Ethan nodded solemnly, like he'd ever lifted a finger for Jack. I wanted to scream, to claw the smugness off his face, but Sarah's hand tightened on mine. "Our turn," she muttered, standing up. "Your Honor, everything they've said is a lie. Lydia Harper has been the sole provider for this family. Here's the proof." She slid a thick folder across the table. Bank statements, pay stubs, utility bills, every dime I'd earned and spent to keep us afloat. The judge flipped through it, her brow furrowing as the numbers told a story Ethan couldn't deny. "And this," Sarah said, holding up my phone. "Recordings of the abuse she's endured." She pressed play, and Ethan's voice filled the room, sharp and cruel. "You're worthless, Lydia." Dorothy's followed, cold as ice. "No one else would put up with her." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Ethan shifted in his seat, his mask slipping, while Dorothy's handkerchief froze mid-dab. "That's not all," Sarah added, placing the brick and note on the table. "They threatened her son, smashed her car window to scare her into staying. Here's the evidence." The judge's eyes narrowed, but Ethan's lawyer jumped up. "Objection! That's circumstantial. She could have staged it." Sarah didn't flinch. "Then explain this," she said, turning to me. "Lydia, show them." I took a deep breath, my legs trembling as I stood. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cracking but steadying. "They threatened to take Jack. My world. I reached into my bag and pulled out his crumpled drawing, the stick figure family he'd made, just him and me under a bright sun. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I held it up. This is why I'm here. He trusts me to protect him, and they tried to rip him away. The courtroom went silent, the air heavy with the weight of my words. I locked eyes with the judge, letting her see the truth in my tears. I've paid every bill, cooked every meal, kissed every scraped knee while they tore me down. They called me nothing, but I'm not nothing to him. Ethan shot out of his chair, his face red. "She's lying!" he shouted. "She's lying!" The judge banged her gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Carter. You'll get your turn." He sank back, his fists clenched, and I saw it. Fear in his eyes. For the first time, he knew I wasn't backing down. Sarah delivered the final blow. "We also have evidence of Mr. Carter's infidelity. Photos of him with another woman taken last month, and Mrs. Carter's affair with a neighbor, ongoing for years." She slapped a stack of pictures on the table. "Ethan with a blonde at a bar. Dorothy sneaking into a house down the street." The gallery erupted, whispers turning to murmurs of shock. Dorothy screeched, her voice shrill. "You invaded our privacy." I leaned forward, my voice cold. "No, I exposed the truth." The judge called for order, her gavel a thunderclap. She studied the evidence, the drawing still in my hand, then spoke, her voice softer than before. "Mrs. Harper, this court sees your strength. The financial records prove you've carried this family alone. The threats, the abuse, it ends here. Full custody of Jack is yours. Mr. Carter will receive no support. No child should lose a mother like you." My knees buckled, relief flooding me as Sarah caught my arm. It was over. I'd won. Ethan glared at me, his jaw tight, while Dorothy hurled one last barb. "You'll pay for this, you ungrateful wretch," she spat, her face twisted with rage. I didn't flinch. Their words couldn't touch me anymore. As I stepped out of the courtroom, the sun hit my face, warm and bright like the one in Jack's drawing. I'd fought for him, for us, and I'd never let them take that away again. The courtroom's echo faded as I drove to Meg's house that afternoon, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Jack ran out the moment I pulled up, his small arms wrapping around my legs before I could even shut the car door. "Mommy!" he squealed, his voice a balm to every bruise I'd carried. I knelt down, pulling him into a hug, his warmth chasing away the cold that had settled in me for years. "We're going home, buddy," I whispered, my voice thick with tears I didn't bother to hide. A new home, just us. His eyes lit up, that gap-toothed grin breaking through. "Really?" I nodded, and for the first time in forever, I felt light. We moved into a small rental a week later. A one-story house with peeling paint and a creaky porch. Nothing fancy, but ours. No Ethan barking orders, no Dorothy's sneers poisoning the air. I unpacked the last box in the living room, Jack's toys scattered across the floor, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The walls weren't thick with hostility anymore. They hummed with possibility. I had won full custody, no strings attached, and Ethan and Dorothy got nothing, not a dime, not a say. The judge's words still rang in my ears. "No child should lose a mother like you." They'd given me more than a ruling. They'd given me back my life. Word of the trial spread fast, a wildfire tearing through our little suburb. Neighbors who'd once nodded politely now whispered behind their hands when Ethan walked by, his head down, his shoulders hunched. The bar photos had hit the local gossip mill. Him with that blonde, laughing like he hadn't a care while I'd been drowning. Dorothy fared worse. Her affair with Mr. Jenkins down the street was the scandal of the year. The same women she'd gossiped with at church now shunning her in the grocery aisles. She was alone, her throne crumbled, and I heard Mr. Jenkins had packed up and left town. Good riddance. I saw Ethan once, a month later outside the bank. I'd just deposited my paycheck, mine alone now, no one leeching it away. When I spotted him on a bench, staring at the pavement. His hair was greasy, his shirt wrinkled, a far cry from the man who'd strutted around our old house like a king. "Lydia!" he called as I passed, his voice weak, hollow. I almost kept walking, let him fade into the background like a bad dream, but something made me stop. "I'm sorry," he said, barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize how much I depended on you. I took you for granted." I tilted my head, studying him, the man who'd shoved me, threatened me, tried to steal my son. "I know," I said simply and turned away. His apology didn't erase the scar on my wrist or the fear in Jack's eyes. It was too late for that. But then, a few nights later, something shifted. I was locking up the house when I found a letter slipped under the door. No stamp, just a plain envelope with my name scrawled in Ethan's messy handwriting. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over it, half tempted to toss it in the trash, unopened. Curiosity won. Inside was a single page. "Lydia, I'm getting help. Therapy, meds. The stuff I hid from you. I messed up. Worse than you know. Keep Jack safe. Ethan." I stared at it, my heart a tangle of anger and something softer. Something I couldn't name. Burn it or believe him? A chance at redemption or another lie to pull me back? I folded it up, tucking it into a drawer. I wasn't ready to decide, not yet. That evening, I sat on the porch steps, the air cool and sweet with summer's end. Jack darted around the tiny yard, chasing fireflies, their tiny lights flickering like stars he could hold. "Look, Mom!" he shouted, cupping one in his hands, its glow illuminating his face. He ran to me, climbing into my lap, and asked, "We're safe now, right?" I brushed his curls back, my chest tight with a love so fierce it hurt. "We're more than safe, buddy," I said, my voice steady. "We're free." He grinned, resting his head against me, and we watched the fireflies dance, their light a promise of something new. The scar on my wrist caught the glow of the porch light, faded but still there, a map of where I'd been. It didn't ache anymore, not like it used to. The wounds in my heart, the ones Ethan and Dorothy had carved, would take longer to heal, but they were fading too. I thought of that letter, of Ethan's words, and wondered if people could change, or if some bridges stayed burned. For now, it didn't matter. This, Jack's laughter, this quiet night, this little house, was enough. As the fireflies blinked out one by one, I whispered to myself, "We're not just surviving anymore, we're living." And for the first time in years, I believed it. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning.